on
Just as good.
yeah, on three, and then I'll go 1, 2, 3, and we'll give it a start. So, well, hello. My name is Ben Kroll. I'm a contributor to Variety, among other places, a freelance journalist. So, if anybody's listening, I am looking for work. And I am joined today with Ed Guiney, producer of Element Pictures, and producer behind many of the more successful literary adaptations in recent years. Ed, I'm so glad that you could join us.
Thanks so much, Ben. Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Before we go really in depth into what is and what makes for a successful adaptation, can you tell us a little bit about your own career and how you got here today?
Sure, yeah. Well, I've been working as a producer, I guess, since I produced my first film in 1993, 94, so that's quite a long time ago. But I run Element Pictures with my partner Andrew Lowe. We're based in Dublin and London and Belfast. We started life as a feature film company, but we've kind of morphed into other things. We also distribute movies. We own some theatres in Ireland, 2 cinemas, 2 art house cinemas. And we obviously also make television drama as well. So there's about 35 of us in the company outside of the cinemas, split across 3 different offices, and then the 2 cinemas in Ireland, as I said. And I guess we're kind of best known for making, I suppose, what would be called specialty films or art house films. We've had success with films by Lenny Abrahamson, with whom we have a very long-standing relationship. We were childhood friends, and we've worked together all our professional lives. We've produced all of his work for the screen, bar one thing. And then obviously the work of Yorgos Lanthimos, The Lobster, Killing the Sacred Deer, and The Favourite, and hopefully many more. So I guess we're a company that's sort of very oriented towards signature creators, towards filmmakers who make kind of audacious, bold, big statements that hopefully attract audiences. And we're always, we've obviously worked with many other filmmakers, including Joanna Hogg and Sean Durkin, Sebastian Lelio, Paddy Bernach, many others, and looking forward to exciting opportunities ahead, and feel like we're at a good time for the film industry.
Well, that I think is a very natural launching point to the subject of today's conversation, which is on-screen adaptations and what makes a successful adaptation, what are some of the pitfalls perhaps for making an adaptation, and what lessons can be learned from recent adaptations that you yourself have produced. And so you talked about your producing history, and I believe that the films that you've made, Room with Lenny Abrahamson, Disobedience by Sebastian Lelio, and certainly Normal People and Conversation with Friends, the BBC Hulu series, have all been literary adaptations, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, you're right. They are. It's a great source of material for us. We have a kind of, it's something that we pay an awful lot of attention to. It's a great conversation starter with a filmmaker, if nothing else. If you bring them a book, even if it's not something that they immediately gravitate towards, but it's a great way of opening a conversation. It's a great articulation of an idea and a world and a set of characters. So we spend a lot of time and energy looking at new books and trying to be ahead of the pack in terms of reading manuscripts of books that have yet to be published. It's exciting. It's an exciting source of material.
And what does that work look like when you're in the early, very open, pores open, antennas out phase?
Well, we have a book scout, and she gives us kind of updates on a weekly basis as to what the new books are that are about to be published, what's coming up. And then one of my colleagues, Matt Power, spends not all, but an awful lot of his time reading books, reviewing literary material. We also think a lot about the filmmakers we're working with and who we want to work with. And are in a dialogue with them about the kinds of material that they're interested in, and that also kind of informs how we look at books that are out there, new books, and indeed older books as well, like going back into the canon and seeing what else is out there. So it's a kind of it's just an ongoing thing. We're at it all the time. And then we have a weekly book school, but and then we have many books that are already in development for both film and television. So it's big part of our lives.
So at this point in your career as a producer, you've obviously, you've got some hard-won wisdom, one would hope. But when you read something, what clicks? When you see, what's the difference between a good book and a good adaptation? Put it that way.
Well, not all good books make good movies, obviously, and equally, you can make a very good film or piece of television from a book that may not be amazing. We tend to gravitate towards literary material. So actually, in a way, we tend to gravitate towards books that we love. So we tend to be trying to find things that really speak to us, and then trying to adapt those to bring them to the screen. And there's all sorts of different ways of approaching that. Sometimes a book will suggest a very, very direct adaptation. So in other words, the adaptation may cleave quite closely to the source material, or indeed a book may be an inspiration for something, and that actually what you end up making or developing may be quite a remove from the original book, ostensibly at least, or it may feel like it's quite a remove, but hopefully it sort of owes quite a lot to the original book in terms of spirit or world or character or whatever it might be. So it's sort of it really varies, and it obviously depends an awful lot on the filmmaker and what they're interested in. And if we bring someone a book that we think is fantastic, there's all sorts of ways of going about adapting that book. And so, a particular filmmaker will see, one particular storyline or character or whatever is particularly fascinating. So, they all change and morph in the hands of the filmmakers that we work with as well.
Well, I think that's interesting as well. The term adaptation is kind of broad, and it's not exactly precise, is it? I mean, what is an adaptation? We're getting a little bit theoretical here, and then we'll get more concrete as we go on. But in your mind, what is an adaptation? Is it a translation? Is it a conversation, a condensation, a bastardization? What actually is it?
I think it's let me think about the way of expressing this. I mean, it is, it's certainly in its best incarnation. I think it's about a film or television iteration of the piece of material, which is kind of, if you like, repurposed for the screen. But it's really, I guess, it's about the coming together of the book or whatever with a filmmaker. So it's kind of that kind of cocktail. It's those two things. It's the filmmaker's perspective and it's the book, and it's the kind of child of that union, if that makes sense, is the adaptation. And as I said earlier, if you have, taking the analogy maybe a little further, if you have one of the parents are different, then you have a very different outcome. So I think that it is about those two things. It's the synthesis of a filmmaker's vision with the book, and then you get a particular thing.
And your job as a producer is to play matchmaker between those two parents, then?
Or midwife?
Fair enough. Well, let's talk about some of your specific histories with adaptation. Well, leaving off normal people and conversation with friends, because we'll get a little bit more in depth into that. Something like Disobedience, something like Room. Could you talk about how those projects came about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Room was, I remember really well how we sort of came about. I mean, Lenny and I think we had made a film called What Richard Did, which also was an adaptation of a book actually called Bad Day at Black Rock, an Irish novel. And I think we were finishing Frank, which we did with Donald Gleeson, Michael Fassbender. And we were thinking about what we wanted to do next. And actually I remember very well, we were just sitting around looking at reviews of recently published books. We had looked at kind of, I think it was maybe near the end of the year, so we were looking at the kind of lists of, you know, the kind of top, you know, reviewed books of the year in the New York Times or whatever, and just running through things. And we came across Room. I mean, it was obviously a very well-known book. It was incredibly well reviewed when it went out into the world first, and it definitely piqued Lenny's interest. Just the kind of description of it, just the bold description of that story, which was about a mother and child incarcerated by this kind of this sort of very psychopathic character, and it's really about their escape from that situation. And it really intrigued Lenny. I remember he read it. He phoned me up very soon afterwards and said, "You should read it. It's amazing." My son had just been born. I remember it was 2010, and I read it kind of as a new dad, which I think gave it a particular sort of piquancy and a particular relevance. Although the boy in the book is a lot older than my little baby son was at that time, it's sort of, I think, being as you are as a new parent, often sort of, you know, kind of indoors with the new child an awful lot of the time. It sort of, in some ways, kind of mirrors the experience of Man Room. So anyway, and it's an incredible book. Emma's book is amazing. So we both really fell for it. It was a complete coincidence that Emma was Irish. And actually, as it turned out, you know, we didn't really know her, but we knew who she was. We had a lot of mutual friends. We come from the same part of Dublin, so we had a lot of kind of associations with each other. Anyway, Lenny sort of completely fell for it. We, at that time, were working a lot with Film 4, with Tessa Ross at Film 4, who ran it at the time, great supporters of ours. And we decided to make a play for it, to look at optioning the book. And when we first reached out to Emma, I think she was not at all interested in us. I think the idea of, you know, optioning her most successful book to two guys from her hometown, when she'd made, you know, a career as a very successful figure in the international literary scene, that prospect wasn't at all exciting to her, I think. She had much bigger fish to fry, and there was an awful lot of interest from quite big filmmakers at the time. Anyway, Lenny wrote her a very, very detailed letter outlining how he would make the film, which was, I don't know, 10 pages long, went into huge detail, incredibly thoughtful and thought out, and incredibly compelling. We sent that to Emma, and, you know, she came back at the time saying, well, look, I'm just about to appoint an agent to look, you know, to sell the rights to the book, but there's an awful lot of interest in it. Sort of don't hold your breath, kind of, not quite, but kind of. Anyway, we stayed in touch, and over the next year or two, Emma appointed an agent, Katsi Evashevsky. At the time, she was at UTA in LA. She's now at Anonymous, but she was a very well-known literary agent. She sold, for instance, the Twilight trilogy, those books, and she's very successful. We politely stayed in touch with Emma. And during the time that we stayed in touch with Emma, I guess Lenny continued to get more and more successful. And I think that Emma always remembered the letter that he wrote to her, and how kind of it spoke to her, and how she felt that it was a very powerful articulation of how she would like to see the book being adapted. And so, you know, I guess it was about 2 years after we first came across the book, we finally got the rights. We met Emma. She really connected with Len. As I say, he was becoming more of a force in the industry, you know, better known as a filmmaker. And we agreed to make it together. And actually, from there, it all came together very quickly. But and I remember when you know, we first, you know, got the option to that book, it was a very clear prospect to the market. We ended up working with Glenn Basner at Film Nation, who we love, a brilliant sales company. And I remember, you know, talking to Glenn about it, and he was going, well, look, this just makes complete sense. The book Room, which at that point was very successful, plus Lenny Abrahamson, I can sell that basically. So it is the case that kind of a well-known piece of literary material, a book that's successful, really helps with the sale, with setting up a movie and getting a movie financed.
The other interesting thing about Room, well, not the only other interesting thing, but another interesting thing about Room is that Emma Donoghue herself wrote the screenplay to it.
Yeah, and that was, always. I mean, she was very open about it, to be honest. I mean, she said, "Look, I want to write the screenplay. If you feel like it's not the way you want to go, or you want to, kind of think about it differently, I totally understand that. But let me have a go at it, and let's take it from there." So it was a very, kind of open and clear and reasonable request on her part. And she wrote a great script, and she was a great collaborator. So we continued to work with her all through the process, and she and Lenny had a really good time together. What was really good about that process as well is that Emma always understood that the book was hers, she was the author of the book, but that the film would be Lenny's and that he would be the author of the film. So she always understood that, at the end of the day, he would have final say when it came to the film, and was very respectful of that. And also and that led to, I think, it allowed for a really constructive relationship between the two of them, that she trusted him totally. She loved his films. They became very good friends. They became very close. But, whenever there was a kind of question or whatever, if Lenny felt that there was a particular way to go, well, then she would always respect that and go with that. So that made for a very, very good collaboration. And I think it's something that, more generally, if you're adapting a book of a novelist, for certain filmmakers, it would be hard, I think, to do that without having the kind of free reign to do what they felt was best, I think. Now, obviously, with some novelists, they end up having approval of the book, or of the screenplay and of the film and all that kind of thing. And that obviously can work in many circumstances. But I guess it's one of the things you need to be really clear about if you are setting out in an adaptation, to what extent the writer of the novel or book will be involved in it, and what their kind of input might be, and what approvals they have, and all that kind of stuff. That's really important. And really important that everyone understands the rules of engagement, because things can get messy otherwise.
Of course. Well, it makes me think there's a line that I came upon from the filmmaker Guillermo del Toro talking about adaptations. And he says, "It's like marrying a widow. You try to be respectful of the memory of the dead husband, but come Saturday night, bam." Now, maybe not being as blue about it, but there probably is there's more than a little bit of truth in that. Is that you do have to make it your own, and you have to maybe get a little bit messy sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always really tried to avoid that by involving the novelists, at every stage of the way, and having him or her read drafts of the script, be involved in, kind of rehearsals, come to set, be part of the family of making the film. I mean, that's, with Naomi Alderman and Disobedience, which, that novel was very much inspired by her own kind of personal circumstances. So she was incredibly close to it. It was a piece of fiction, but it was a piece of fiction that was very, very personal to her. And she was only a kind of positive force around that film. She didn't write the script, although she actually is a really good screenwriter. But she was really supportive of Sebastian and Rebecca Lenkiewicz as they worked through it, and read all the drafts of the script, and was very much on set. In fact, her dad has a small part in the film. So I think it's in a way, it's really about communication there. And I think it's a completely human thing. If a novelist has written a book, it's obviously very dear to them. It's a massive act of creation. And one of the jobs of the filmmaker and film producer, maybe in particular, is to stay in touch with the writer and to reassure them that what's happening is sort of positive, and that that the reaction to their the adaptation of their book is in good hands and they feel good about it. Because I think where things often fall apart is when authors aren't kept in the loop, and then they come to see the final film and they get a big shock because it feels like it's so different.
Oh, you're cracking up.
Sorry.
Oh.
If you've been told, am I back?
Oh, you're back, better than ever.
Sorry. If you've been talking them all the way through, and the decisions that are made, and the modifications that are made, the tweaks that are made, and they're, even if they don't necessarily agree with them, if they understand why they're happening, then that obviously means that when they see the final film, it's kind of, they really understand how it came to be the way that it is, So I think,
to make them feel included in the process.
Exactly, yeah. Communication is everything, as ever, I think, yeah.
So on the timeline of how a film gets made, we see that an interesting book can be an icebreaker with a director that you want to work with whom you want to work. A hot title can help make a package sell. Good director,
Yeah.
a well-selling, well-known title can help a film sell. It can help find financing. Conversations with the original author and the screenwriters, the producers, the directors are essential during the adaptation phase. Now, what about the actual production phase? Does the nature of making an adaptation change anything on set? I mean, obviously you want the screenwriters to have read the source material. Is it important for the set designers to have read the source material as well?
I mean, I think inevitably they do. And again, going back to Room, half of that film takes place, half of the novel takes place in Room, which is the shed where Ma and Jack, the two lead characters, are held captive. And there are very, very detailed descriptions of Room in Emma's book. And so that was a huge resource for the design team, and for Lenny, and for the DP, Danny Cohen. That was a massive resource to them, and incredibly helpful, because of course the description in the novel is much deeper than the description in the screenplay. So it was a very useful thing to have, and again, it all depends. I mean, I think that most actors and most heads of department will go back to the source material just because they're interested, if nothing else. But also, it's very often the case that if you hear that a filmmaker has bought a book, what you can do is read the book. You may not be able to get your hands on the script, but the book is probably out in the world, so it's a really good way of understanding more about what the intention is. But like we would never make it mandatory, but I'd say most people end up reading the source material because they're interested.
And I guess that's an interesting idea about the idea of conversation between a book and a film. I mean, and this is completely anecdotal and not really germane, but when I was 13, 14 years old, there were lots of these movies that I enjoyed watching that I found that were based on books. I don't know, L.A. Confidential, The Godfather, and I would see the movies first, and then I would go back and I would read the book, and it was a way of just living in the movie world for a longer period of time. And then it's a funny way, I find, of sometimes when I fall in love with a movie and I find out that it's based on a book, I'll read the book after, so I'm not disappointed by the choices the movie made, but in fact it actually opens the world up, and it gives me more time to kind of linger in the ideas that the film kind of hopefully transmits well.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Well, let's move on a little bit to the last part of one of the next parts anyway. Once a film is being made, the promotional aspect of it, and how do adaptations affect that?
I mean, I think if again, say with something like Room, that was a huge book club book, if you like. It was one of those books that lots of book clubs read, and I mean, I suppose many successful books are, but that was one that in particular, was talked about among groups of people all over the world. And so when we came to release the film, we definitely leaned into that and leaned into, ideally what you'll have is a very close working relationship with the publisher. And the publisher is really motivated to be part of it, because obviously they can sell many more copies of the book after the film comes out or the television show. So you want to again stay in touch with the publisher all the way through, and maybe make stills and artwork available to them. Like for instance, with Room, the publishers reissued the novel with an image that was very close to the poster for the film, and the artwork and the reviews for the film and all that kind of stuff. So it's sort of and again, if those reissued novels go into bookshops, well, certainly pre-coronavirus, you had a lot of people going in and out of bookshops, and that was a very good additional marketing tool. So it's in terms of the marketing of a film, it's really important, and something that you really want to take full advantage of, and almost always do, because it's in the publisher's interests as well.
And on that front, how can publishers and marketers and editors, publishers, marketing campaigns, and producers work better together?
I mean, I think it's hard to sort of generalize about that in a sense. I mean, I think that it's each project is different. I think it just sort of behoves you as a film producer or filmmaker, or indeed a publisher or writer, to kind of talk about the possibilities early on in the process, as early as possible. And again, it's another reason to keep the original author of the book very much part of the development and genesis of the project, is so that they kind of can keep their teams involved in it as well. I mean, there are various sort of kind of markets that exist, where virtual markets mainly, but where publishers will put up information about books that are available, and producers can kind of go through those, or broadcasters or whatever can go through those, and see if they spot things that are of interest, and that's reasonably well organized. I mean, we tend to as I said earlier, we work very closely with a book scout, and she has a sense of what our taste is, and so kind of on a weekly basis, she'll report to us and say, like, these are the books you should be paying attention to, and she'll read them and she'll tell us what she thinks suits us best. And she's a conduit and a kind of between the publishing world and ourselves. But it's like it's like anything. It's sort of it's hard to kind of systematize it too much, if that makes sense, because at the end of the day, it's so much to do with kind of personal taste, and it's kind of like, it's sort of like truffle hunting. I mean, there's so many books published, there are so many that it's like. Are
you calling your book scout a pig?
No, definitely not. But it's kind of, it's about instinct and taste and all of those things, so it's hard to kind of be too prescriptive about it. But I mean, obviously one thing that one could take away from that is that you need to read a lot. You really need, or you need to know someone who reads a lot. And that's incredibly important, because also, even if you're reading, I mean, I find it very difficult going through publishers' lists and stuff like that, because they all just begin to blur when you just write 5 lines of a description of a book. It's like impossible to know really how good, bad, or indifferent it is, so you kind of have to engage with stuff. And it's endless.
I mean, so just joking aside, I mean, how does one find a book scout that you can rely on, that understands your taste and understands your needs?
Well, I mean, I mean, before we could afford a book scout, because I guess, that's an additional expense for the development team. What we used to do is do it ourselves, and we would, try and read all the reviews in the newspapers, every weekend or every week of the new novels coming out. And, certainly, as an Irish company, we would always pay particular attention to Irish novels, which, as it turns out, is quite a good source of material, because in general, Irish novels are, very good. They're very good Irish fiction writers. So in a way, what you could do is say, well, look, I'm just going to pay attention to a particular subset of all the possible, different types of books that are out there. I'm just going to, as a French producer, I'm just going to pay particular attention to French YA. That's my niche. That's what I'm going after, and I'm going to be the expert in that. So if you don't have multiple resources, you could just choose to kind of become really well read in one particular kind of niche, if you like. But with us, it was always we would try and keep an eye on new Irish novels, and that, as I say, was just very simply reading reviews, reading there's publishers weekly, there are trade magazines, Bookseller, all these things, just kind of keeping an eye on new books, trying to get to request them from the publishers or whatever where possible, and just read a lot. But I guess in order to find a book scout and afford a book scout, I guess you need to have certain resources. And there aren't that many people around doing that job. There aren't that many, and the good ones are in big demand, obviously. And it may, I don't know, actually. I know that it's a job that exists in London, and it exists in LA and New York, and I presume it exists in Paris and Rome and Berlin, and maybe the big film centers across Europe. But it's probably not something that exists in every country. I mean, the other thing that I often did when I was looking for books is go into bookshops, and you'll find often a section of where Bookseller recommends, where the people who sell the books in the shop just talk about their favorite novels, and they may not necessarily be new novels, they could be old novels as well. And that's actually really interesting. You think, I don't know if you've seen those, but you kind of, it's a bookshelf, and then there's just a little note written by one of the booksellers in the shop saying why they love this particular book. And that's kind of a good way of finding things. And then of course nowadays online, it's so easy to look up lists on Amazon or Goodreads or whatever, so there are incredible resources if a producer, for instance, or filmmaker are interested in finding a book to adapt. There are lots and lots of resources to do so, and I do it all the time myself. I mean, I'm talking to a filmmaker at the moment, and he has a particular interest, and I've actually just been going online, just looking at stuff, going down rabbit holes, coming across books, reminding myself of books that maybe were very successful in the past, and all of that stuff. And you definitely come up with leads for sure.
Well, let's move to the second part. Let's talk a little bit about normal people and conversation with friends. And from what I understand, you had actually started developing conversations with friends before you started developing normal people, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's true. We
well, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, we were developing that with Rose Garnett at BBC Films, who is an executive that we've worked a lot with over the years. She used to be head of creative at Film 4, and so I think first started working with her on Frank, or Room Properly was probably the first proper thing we did. We made a lot of films with her, and now she runs BBC Films. So we're in a kind of constant dialogue about projects and books. And in fact, Rose initially mentioned conversations with friends to us because it was an Irish novel, and we're an Irish company, and we read it, and then we ended up starting to develop it as a feature film initially, and we were working on that for a little while when Normal People hadn't been published, but about 2 years ago, we were sent the manuscript of Normal People. And again, what often happens with books that are likely to be very sought after and likely to be kind of big titles is the film agent at a certain point in time, before the book is published, will send out the manuscript to producers and broadcasters or film financiers, if it's a film, they'll select a number around the world and they'll send the book out, and then they'll encourage people to make bids for the film rights or the television rights in the book. So we were sent the galleys, the manuscript of Normal People, about 2 years ago. It was spring 2018, so a little more than 2 years ago, along with like everyone else in the world at that time. I mean, as in all of the SVOD players, HBO, presumably big producers in the Anglophone world primarily. So in the US,
because people
UK.
knew people had an understanding that the book was going to be a big deal.
Yeah, because Conversations was a big deal. I guess her second novel, that would, there was huge anticipation for that. So so the job of the agent in that environment is to kind of is to manage the auction of the film rights. So she sent the book out to us and lots of other people as well. And basically what they're saying is, well, come to us, tell us how you'll make this, tell us how you'll pay for it, tell us, how you'd go about it. And they then choose who they think is the best partner. And I must say, when we first got the manuscript, I was a bit anxious, because I thought, well, maybe, Sally's agent won't want two books to be with the same production company, because, in a way, maybe you want to spread your bets and you don't want to be with the same people. And we were still developing Conversations with friends. So although we were getting on very well with each other, we still hadn't actually, made anything of her work, if you like. So I kind of thought, well, maybe if I was her, I wouldn't want to go with the same company again. And so there was part of me that was hoping, when I read the book, that I didn't like it, so that I wouldn't have to compete for it and then be disappointed. But fortunately, I guess, I completely fell in love with it. And, I worked closely with a team of people in Element, very close colleagues, very, very clever people, with whom, we all discuss books and ideas and filmmakers and all that kind of stuff. So it's a kind of a small group, including Emma Norton and Chelsea Hoffman, my partner Andrew Lowe, and other people. And we all read the book and completely fell in love with it. It also felt to us very obviously television, I think, because the novel takes place over kind of 4 or 5 years, and it is episodic in nature, because it's spread over that time and tells the story of this incredible first love between the two characters, Connell and Marianne, as they initially fall in love and then kind of go to university together and form each other as adults in a way. So that just felt like television to us. And then, as I said earlier, we have a very, very long history with Lenny Abrahamson. In fact, I've known him since I was a teenager, but I also went to Trinity with him, Trinity College Dublin, which is the university that is in the novel Normal People. It's the university that Connell and Marianne go to in the centre of Dublin. So although we're a lot older than Connell and Marianne in the book, we had a very, very close connection to that world. And so we shared the book immediately with Lenny, and as I hoped, he completely fell for it. He thought it was incredible. Absolutely loved Sally's writing. So, we now had Lenny attached and interested in being part of the adaptation of the book. And then the other sort of really important thing that happened at that time was Rose Garnish, who I mentioned earlier, with whom we had been developing Conversations with Friends. She also read Normal People at the same time. And she loved it and agreed that it would be an amazing piece of television. So she introduced the novel to her colleagues in TV drama at the BBC, in particular Piers Wenger, who's the head of BBC drama. And he fell for it. He fell completely in love with it also. But we were all really aware that it was a very, very competitive situation. There were many, many players with deep pockets who were interested in buying the rights to the book. So BBC did a really brave and unusual thing in that they basically greenlit the series, on the basis of the book and Lenny's interest, which meant that we were able to go back to Sally and say to her, look, if you sell us the rights to your book, we promise you it will be made. There are no ifs or buts. It's greenlit. It's a greenlit show, and Lenny Abrahamson will direct it. And she was a great fan of Lenny's, and I think was very compelled by that proposal. There was there were no conditions around that. It was going to be made, and so that's how we got the rights to Normal People. And it was, it was a really brave thing that BBC did to actually kind of elevate us above the competition, to actually say, like, if you give us this book, we're going to make it.
With you involved.
Yes, of course, but it's just it's a hard thing to say no to.
Right. Well, it goes back to what we were saying, that like a book can help get a project made, and then sometimes being able to get a project made can help land the book. And so it's kind of the other way.
Exactly. Yeah.
So two things that you said there that I want to build on. First, the relationship with Sally Rooney moving forward from that point. You brought her on as a creative partner on the series. But and then maybe connected to that is just when the BBC greenlit it as a series, and they gave it like a series order, then did you already know at that time that it would be a 12-episode series, or was it, okay, so that's where I want to go to. I mean, bringing on Sally Rooney, and also when you're adapting a book into a film, okay, well, generally speaking, it's going to be between 2 to 3 hours, market considerations and everything. But when you're adapting a book, how do you know that the series will be 4 episodes, 10 episodes, 12 episodes, 15 episodes? I mean, how does that happen? And then concurrently, how did Sally Rooney get involved on the creative aspect of it as well?
Well, they're actually sort of interrelated, of course, because as you rightly say, Sally, she sold us the rights to her book, but also brilliantly, she agreed to write some of the scripts, and she also came on board as an executive producer for the entire show, and really welcomed that. I mean, we had spoken to her about screenwriting before, and she didn't really have the time to contemplate it, but she agreed to have a go at Normal People, and just to see how she took to it, and she took brilliantly to it. She's a really good scriptwriter. She did all the work. She read other scripts. She read treatments. She kind of read all the books about screenwriting, and then she wrote some blinding scripts, basically. And as you say, concurrently with that was a kind of a whole conversation about what we were going to do. And when BBC greenlit the show, the only thing they said to us was, we would just like you to make the entire book in one iteration. In other words, don't split it into seasons, just make the whole thing. And I think that was partly motivated by the fact that hopefully the TV series would be coming out around the same time as the book. They would both feed off each other. It would be a moment in the kind of the culture, and would be one kind of, as I say, one iteration of the novel. And that was fine. And we were happy with that. That was our intention also. The other thing that they said that sort of was important was that it was commissioned for BBC Three, which is the BBC's digital channel. And what's important about that is that BBC Three, like the SVODs, doesn't really have any rules around duration. It doesn't matter, So Piers Wenger basically said to us, look, you however you want to do it, if you want to make one episode 10 minutes long and another episode an hour long, whatever you want to do, that's fine. Go ahead and do it. At the time, there was a Norwegian show called Scam that was very successful, and we looked at that because that had sort of episodes of varying lengths and kind of went out at different times, and we looked at that possibility as a model for the show, and we were thinking about looking at all sorts of different things, but eventually we hit on the idea of 12 half hours. We always knew we didn't want to make hour-long episodes because we felt that it was a character piece, and that that would put too much pressure on kind of story and narrative, that we wanted to keep it as a kind of very much a character piece rather than something
that's built on recognition of the fundamentals of the book itself. Exactly right.
It's about these two coming together and how they think of each other and themselves and their relationship and all of that stuff. We basically, thought about it as shorter episodes, not hour long. And we just thought, well, 12 half hours feels good. That feels right. That's a kind of, there was a kind of shape to that where the first kind of 3 episodes happened in high school, and then the kind of middle 4 episodes kind of happened, in the kind of early-ish in university, and then the last kind of 4 episodes happen over the remaining years in university. So there's a kind of, the time jumps get bigger as you move through the series, whereas at the beginning it's very much told in a shorter time frame. So it just kind of felt right. And I guess the other thing that kind of we felt about that was, well, that allows it to sort of mirror the structure of a book in a way. Like each episode becomes a chapter, and you can, you know, watch one chapter, one episode, or you can watch multiple chapters or episodes if you so feel like it. But and also it also just felt, as we kind of went through it, and you know, this was a process of a lot of talking. It didn't happen like, it wasn't like, bang, let's do this 12-hour hours. We talked about it an awful lot. But my colleague Chelsea kind of broke down the book, and it kind of felt that it naturally, you know, that you could kind of assign a particular story or personality or movement or emotion to 12 different chapters, if you like. They all had an identity, and all felt like they had an identity. So that was kind of how we hit on it. And you know, making half-hour dramas at that time was not a thing, really. There were very few. Half hours were always identified with comedy, really, or comedy dramas, I suppose, but mainly with comedy. But again, we were very much liberated by the fact that it was initially going to be on BBC Three, so we could do what we liked. So that's sort of how we hit on the 12 half hours. And yeah, in retrospect, I think it was actually the right decision.
One of the other voices in the room was also was screenwriter Alice Birch.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, because Alice Birch is a television writer, but is principally a playwright, or at least started her career principally as a playwright, and then also wrote this the film adaptation of Lady Macbeth. But what was it like having your two main writers, and there was a third writer who wrote one episode 11, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Marco Rowe.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mark.
Yeah, that's okay.
But how did the fact that you had the two lead writers of the series weren't either of them professional television writers, or were not from the television world? It wasn't a conventional writer's room. And how did that maybe affect the flavor of this particular series?
It's a good question. I mean, Alice, you know, is an incredible screenwriter, and you know, she's worked on Succession, and she had worked on Succession by the time that she came to work with us. So she definitely had a kind of profile as a television screenwriter. And the way that it actually evolved was that Sally wrote early drafts of the first 6 episodes, and then got consumed by her new novel. And we brought Alice on to write a number of the second 6. We hadn't kind of specified how many, and we were also talking to Mark at the same time. And so when Sally decided to go back and continue working on her novel, then Alice basically became involved in the first episodes that Sally had started to write, the first 6 episodes. So it was very organic, and they got on incredibly well. Alice had a great ear for Sally's dialogue, really understood her writing, really understood, I think, the DNA of the characters. And, you know, we were really blessed to have her involved. You know, she just, from the very beginning, she was just producing incredible screenplays. And you know, Normal People is also an adaptation. We talked earlier about kind of the nature of adaptations, and how some adaptations cleave very closely to the original material, and how some move quite far away, or the original material can almost just be like an inspiration for the film or the television drama. But in the case of Normal People, I don't think we've ever stuck more closely to an original book than we did with Normal People. The novel sort of was our Bible, always our Bible. And if we had questions, we went back to the Bible. And if the Bible didn't answer those questions, well, then we went back to the writer of the Bible. We went back to Sally if we had questions. So it was, and the dialogue in the novel is fantastic. So, like, you know, we've lifted dialogue straight from the novel that's in the TV show. And although the structure of the TV show is different to the novel, it's absolutely different. It really, it does cleave very closely. And I don't think there's any character that's in the TV show that isn't in the novel. I don't think there's any storyline that's in the TV show that isn't in the novel. They really do kind of mirror each other quite precisely.
Going slightly broader, Normal People is obviously a book that captured the spirit of its times, and the project, the television adaptation of it, came together so quickly after the publication of the book that there was almost no daylight between the world that the book was depicting and the world in which the television show would be made, and so that certainly. The quality of the book is unimpeachable, but that also doesn't really allow for any kind of like shaping and additional transformation. Whereas something like Lady Macbeth, written and adapted by Alice Birch, when she took that story, a book that took place in Russia, if I'm not mistaken, and then she actually set it in northern England, if I'm correct. But there was also a huge period of time between the publication of the book and the actual and the actual adaptation. And so does that also have a role to play? Does the immediacy of a recently published book somewhat preclude the ability to find new areas to explore? And I'm not even really talking about Normal People in this case. That's more a theoretical question.
I think it obviously depends on the book. I mean, I think, but also I think with something that's very zeitgeisty, like Normal People just hits a zeitgeist. And I think the closer the two are together, certainly if you want to make a kind of a faithful adaptation of the book, the better, I guess. And I think, we've seen the massive changes, that have happened in society in the last 3 months, 4 months. It's sort of, kind of zeitgeist change very quickly. And I wonder, Normal People came out at a very particular time when people were at home and, were in a particular frame of mind and, were maybe had a kind of certain openness to it. And as you say, very quickly after the book. But I guess if we were adapting Normal People in 2 or 3 years' time, because the world has changed so much between the publication of the book and the adaptation of the novel, maybe that would have to have kind of more of a claim in the adaptation. Having said that, with something like Normal People as well, it's actually also kind of deceptively classic, and because it is a really great love story, and that's something that's a kind of very enduring form and has always been. And actually, in a way, love stories often tend to be a bit more timeless. Not always, but tend to be a little bit more timeless than other things, maybe. But in general, I would say the closer the adaptation is to the publication of the novel, the less kind of modification you have to do, I think. And we never wanted to do much modification anyway. We, as I said earlier, we completely loved the novel and wanted to kind of, make our television show be as kind of close in spirit and in form and in narrative as to the novel as possible. And one of the things about, I think, Lenny as a filmmaker, he's actually, his skills as a filmmaker, his gifts as a filmmaker are in some ways comparable to Sally's gifts as a novelist. And what I mean by that is that she writes deceptively simple, incredibly inviting novels. They're quite easy to read, but they're really immersive and deep and introduce you to characters who sort of cease to be characters in fiction and almost become real people in one's life, or at least that was my feeling when I read the book. I really felt that I kind of knew these people. I didn't think of them as fictional characters as much. And I think Lenny has the same gift as a filmmaker. I think that he can almost remove the lens between the viewer and the characters on screen, and those characters almost become, people in your life. You feel like you kind of know them. You have a very intimate relationship with them, and I think that sort of obviously engenders a kind of very deep engagement with the the form, whether it's a book or whether it's a TV show. And I think we definitely wanted to try and do that. I mean, I certainly, when I read, well, both Conversations and Normal People, but like when when I put those books down, when I first read them, I had a very strong feeling of, feeling a bit bereft, a little bit sad that I'd left this world and these people behind, and like by closing the book. And I think we wanted to kind of try and capture that sort of feeling as well in a TV show, that you really entered into a world and you really got to know these people. And it's funny, I live in Dublin, and well, pre-coronavirus, I used to cycle through Trinity, which is the university in the book, and in the show, I used to cycle through there every day on my way to work. And I honestly used to imagine that, Connell and Marianne would come around a corner at any point in time. I really sort of felt like they were real people in the world. I think that's one of the things that makes it special.
Well, right around the same time that Normal People aired on BBC and on Hulu, there was the big screen adaptation of Emma that came out in theaters, that was actually adapted by the novelist Eleanor Catton. I'm not sure if I pronounced it. And now that was kind of a different proposition, that was directed by Autumn de Wilde, a fashion photographer, gave a very different sense of it. But in a way, that movie had the ability to give a different taste and a different view of the story, because there was less onus on representation. If somebody doesn't like this version of Emma, well, then there have been several other versions, and there will be several other versions to come. Whereas for something like Normal People, as you were saying, you felt bereft when you finished reading the book, and so your series, or if maybe a film of something, everything, it's the next exposure that a viewer will have after finishing the book. Well, the next point of exposure that person is going to have is going to be the adaptation of it. And is there a sense that, are there more stakes, or are more things engendered when you are adapting something that's so beloved that has never seen a prior adaptation, compared to something that is so beloved that other adaptations exist?
Yeah, I think definitely you're more you are more exposed, and the stakes do feel like they're higher. And the other thing, of course, that happened with us with Sally's book is that when we first optioned it and started working on the TV show, it hadn't been published, and then it was published in the UK and became a huge success. And then subsequently, in 2019, a year later, it was published in the US and became a massive success. And it became that book that, if you go on the tube in London or the subway in New York, it's that book that everyone's reading, and it's everywhere in the culture, and has become, I don't know, one of the most successful novels of recent times, and Sally, one of the most successful novelists in the world. So although Conversations with Friends was a huge success, Normal People has been an even greater success. And when we started to make the show, it didn't have that kind of reputation. And as we, worked through and, were making it, and, began to come out into the world, obviously more and more people fell in love with the book, and more people, I guess, had ideas about, were fans of it and kind of felt connected to it, and felt that, that I guess they had a particular vision in mind of how it might be made. But what we had, I guess, one thing that we really had going for us was, as I said to you earlier, the book was our Bible, but also Sally was very much part of the filmmaking team. And what I mean by that was, yes, she wrote scripts, but she also was across all the casting. She was very much part of the final choices we made when we cast Paul and Daisy in the leads. She came on set. She was watching rushes. She watched cuts of the show. So she was involved, at every step of the way. And I guess one of the benefits of that is that, if she, the creator of the novel, feels good about the adaptation, well, then hopefully those people who absolutely love the novel may also feel, have a similar kind of sense of security about what we've done with the adaptation. But of course, people, come to these things completely subjectively. But I think by and large, people do feel that that the adaptation, that the series is kind of, does represent the spirit and the form, and the detail and the characterizations that are there in the novel, albeit in a different form. So I don't think that we haven't had many people saying, "Oh my God, you've completely, made a mess of me. You've taken it off in a completely different direction. How could you do this? How could you do that?" Of course, people have quibbles and they go like, "Oh, I didn't think, so and so would look like that," or "I imagined someone completely different in that." You know what I mean? People have those ideas, but by and large, I think people feel like it's sort of close enough to the novel.
You're currently working on Conversations with Friends, and or perhaps not. And I'm not sure where the stages of production are. What experience, or how did your experience on Normal People affect your experience on Conversations with Friends? And I guess I mean, going back to what you were saying before as well, now that you sort of are the Sally Rooney producer, how does one build on that for a second project?
Well, I mean, as I said, we were developing Conversations with Friends as a film, and I think one of the things that became clear to us as we were making Normal People TV show is that actually, for actually that approaching Conversations as a piece for television would be a more satisfying engagement with it than a film. And what I mean by that is, I think naturally with a film you have to still and concentrate because you have less time, and you have to make choices about characters and storylines, and maybe cut things, and not leave certain things out, and all of that. And also I think that Sally's characters in both Normal People and Conversations with Friends benefit from spending time with them because they're quite complex. They take some sitting with to really kind of understand, I think. So I think through making Normal People, it slightly unlocked the approach to Conversations with Friends for us, where we're going like, actually, really the way to do this is not as a kind of concentrated 19-minute distillation of a novel, but actually give it time to breathe and inhabit the world in a kind of more in a more kind of detailed, characterful, forensic way, and so that in a way was sort of the big kind of conclusion we drew, and we made the decision on Conversations with Friends as we were doing Normal People. So it was through that we kind of came to that decision. And then with Conversations with Friends, we're at a phase now where we're the book is being adapted. It's many of the same creative team as in the team at Element, and Lenny is going to direct some of it. That's still TBC. Alice Birch is going to write on it, and so we're in a kind of virtual writers' room at the moment where we haven't announced the other writers, but there are other writers on it, and so we're kind of working through building it, talking about it, looking at scripts, and beginning to think about casting it, and hoping to make it late this year, early next year, depending on when we can get back to filming.
If all things being equal, would you say that you'd be more inclined, less inclined, not really changed, to take future adaptations to streamers and television services?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, do you mean over film? Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
or
yes, over film.
Oh, I
Sorry, I
think it
should have
just
been more
totally,
precise.
yeah, no, I think it just totally depends on the book. It really does. I mean, like we are, we optioned a number of books recently for film, like because they feel like they would make better movies, better 90-minute, 2-hour things. And other books are better in longer form. So I definitely don't have any rule about that at all. It completely depends on the thing, and also on the whether it's a filmmaker or screenwriter or whatever, how they see it as well, and what their angle is. But I think I mean, I think what y- you know is definitely the case is that and I guess it's sort of something that we would always stay open to is maybe trying something, trying to make a book as a TV show, but if that's not working, then reversing or moving over to making it as a film or vice versa or whatever. So I think it just it's just about kind of just staying open to that possibility as you go and exploring it. And so there are no rules, for sure, no rules.
What are the biggest challenges that you've encountered in the 20 years that you've really been working with the adaptation form? And don't say financing, because come on.
No, I mean, I'm financing. I don't regard that as the biggest challenge at all in my life as a producer. I mean, I think there are key decisions. I'm not exactly answering your question, but I'm slightly answering it. Trying to answer it. But there are key decisions in the life of any film, but of an adaptation, or that are that you live or die depending on whether you make the right decision or not at that point, or and certainly, like, for us, the kind of key moments with Normal People was Lenny signing on, because I think if you didn't have a filmmaker who could sort of do justice to the book in the way that I described, in other words, to create characters on screen that feel real and with whom you have an intimate relationship, you could have made a real mess of that adaptation. So it's about a million miles away from being director proof. So you need, in the case of that adaptation, at least, you need the filmmaker or the creator of the TV show to be as brilliant as the novelist of the book. And if they're not as good as each other, I think then you have a real problem. You could make something quite boring and drab with Normal People if you didn't adapt it properly. So the director is a huge moment. And so getting that right is a massive challenge, getting the question of the adapter right. And I would also include, obviously, the fact that Sally adapted, and Alice and Mark in that too, the team or the person that adapts the book for the screen. The other big moment for us is Daisy and Paul finding those two actors who can inhabit the characters, particularly with the love story. It's all about chemistry, and it's all about believing that those two people are kind of intimately involved with each other, and really understanding that in some kind of fundamental, ineffable, inexpressible way. Like, I think it's just a feeling you get, you just believe it, and it's to do with chemistry. And I think so casting Normal People was a massive challenge. Casting is always a massive challenge, but I think when you're making a love story, you need to find two actors who really have incredible chemistry with each other. So I think, had we not got any of those decisions right, I think we could have completely messed up the adaptation. And I think as a producer, the challenge is always to understand what are the key moments, when you're about to make a decision that is going to fundamentally impact on the future adaptation of something. And choosing a director or someone to adapt it, and choosing cast, they're obviously key ones. But sometimes, in the heat of battle and trying to get things done, and trying to just keep going, you can lose sight of these things that really make all the difference. So it's sort of holding them in your mind and not making those decisions too quickly, and really considering them and knowing which decisions are going to be the really important ones. That's really crucial and key, obviously.
And does that only come with experience?
I think experience helps. I think in our case, we've been blessed we have a really great team of people who've been making the show and with whom I work, and so there's an awful lot of talk, an awful lot of what ifs and maybes and possibilities, and talking about different scenarios, and so there's a kind of a brain trust with a lot of trust within it, where people can really um, rehearse scenarios and think about things and talk about things. So I found that to be incredibly valuable. So I think you learn certain things from experience, but I think also just engaging with other people, listening and talking a lot really helps to kind of make the right decisions, I think. And also our broadcast partners, BBC and Hulu, were incredibly supportive and incredibly clever, and very involved in key moments in the discussions as well. And like, we're very lucky, and again, you can just if you don't get this right, you can be in terrible trouble. But we're very lucky in that we had kind of broadcast partners who I think really understood what we were trying to do and really supported it. I think if you're working with people with a completely different understanding of what you're trying to do, then that's a disaster, and that can really derail you. And it's, I don't know, so it's trying to make the right decisions about your partners at every step of the way. And sometimes you don't have that luxury. Sometimes the only way to get something done is to go with the one person who's interested in it, and maybe that works out and maybe it doesn't. So you also just have to deal with the realpolitik of any particular situation and make the most of it, I guess.
We're going to close down because I think we've gone quite to the end here. There's just 2 or 3 more questions that I have, and then we'll wind down shop.
Sure.
Normal People is a book that has touched a lot of people, specifically, not only, but a lot of young people. And it's also something that exists with what we'll call online fan culture. People really connect, and they use social media, and they use online platforms to share, sometimes passionately, sometimes extremely passionately, their thoughts and their ideas and their fan fiction as well. And so, does the highly vocal, highly effective fan base have a role to play in the decision-making process, or just in consideration while you're working on a project?
No, I mean, we didn't. Apart from wanting to honor the book and hope that the people who love the book would also love the TV show, I mean, we didn't think about an online fan base or a social media fan base in particular. I mean, obviously, the people who were marketing it, like the people at BBC and the people at Hulu, really did think about them. I mean, they really did engage with them. But it wasn't something we particularly we thought about when we were making it, except that we were gathering assets. We were gathering digital assets as part of the process, and in the way that we were, gathering stills and, EPKs and interviews and all that stuff. We were doing that, but it definitely didn't influence how we went about making it at all.
I say that just because I was thinking back and preparing for this, of something not quite the same, but similar in a way, is that, in 1995, Nick Hornsby published High Fidelity, and then, only 5 short years later, the film adaptation came out, changing the nationality, changing the setting,
Yeah.
and then recently the Hulu series came out, changing the series again, and changing the gender of the main character. And so that seems to prove that you can take a contemporary text with a very passionate and ardent fan base and make serious changes, and make significant changes, both to who the lead character is, and how that person will interact with the world of the book. But then I was wondering, that proves that it's possible, but does it prove that it's possible, or is it the exception that proves the rule that it's quite difficult?
No, I do think it's possible. I think what you said earlier is totally right. I think the more you move away from something that's sort of a classic novel or a very popular novel, I think I mean, I'm sure there are other possible iterations of Normal People. I'm sure that's true. And maybe there's a film version of it, and maybe there's a musical, maybe there's a stage play, I don't know. But we weren't compelled to do anything other than what we did, which was stick very, very closely to it. But I could imagine maybe if it's as enduring as I can imagine it may be, and if Sally is interested in it, then maybe there may be other versions of it down the line. But I think what you said is right. Like you know, I think it's when something's a bit more established, I guess, or indeed, I think maybe if we had made it, like for instance, if Normal People had been a Spanish language novel and we had made it and it had become a Spanish language success, then I could imagine that maybe there might be an English language version of it. Probably because we've made it in English and it's sold everywhere, that may mean that, but maybe there would be people interested in making local language versions of it. I could imagine that too. They may want to make their own language versions of it. That's possible.
And would you be open to offering advice if somebody wanted to make the Swedish? Well, like Swedish is wrong because actually is a large portion in Sweden, but the Swahili Normal People.
I mean, I think, I don't know if Sally would be interested in that. I have just no idea. But I guess it's, my advice would be to stick as closely to the spirit of it as possible. But obviously, we stuck to the spirit and to the location. We didn't change a thing really. So I guess you would have to change some things. But obviously, we have in Normal People. I think one of the reasons that it works, even though it's very much it's set in Ireland, it's very, very, very kind of specific in terms of where it's set. But I think some of the kind of iconography of it is something that almost everyone understands. The idea of first love, the idea of being a little bit of an outsider or being popular, being, the idea of reforming yourself, becoming a new person when you move from the small town to the big city. All of these things are things that no matter where you're from, you can sort of understand, I think. And I think that's one of the reasons it's worked so well.
I agree. Last question: what's your white whale? What property would you love to tackle if if the world opened itself up to you like that?
Wow. Well, there are various books that I'm chasing at the moment, but I won't mention them. There is a book that I loved, but I didn't. We didn't go for it because it was so kind of culturally specific. But I'm really intrigued to see the adaptation of it, which is a book called Our Share of the Night, which is a novel set in Argentina. It'll be published, I guess, next year, and it's an incredible novel set kind of in the 80s in Argentina. But it's also got this whole kind of supernatural thing going on alongside it, and it's beautifully written from what I could tell. And that is, I think, an amazing book, and I think could make an amazing TV show. But sadly, we won't be doing it.
Okay, fine. I take it back. There is one last question that I have, and then we will end it. And it's really just if you wanted to give a piece of advice, and I mean, I'm speaking to you. I'm not speaking to Sally right now, but to an author who was looking to expand on work that they had developed on the page into other media, what would that piece of advice be?
I mean, I think, like a lot of novelists make really great screenwriters, and some novelists have no interest in writing for the screen at all. Like they just don't. It's not their thing. But I mean, I would give the same advice to a novelist as I would to anyone who wants to be a screenwriter, which is just to write a script and just put pen to paper and do it, because there's nothing that makes the argument more clearly than just picking up a script and reading it and being compelled by it.
Well, I think that's a good place to close down. Well, thank you so much for your time and for your information, and have a great day.
Thanks for the questions. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a million. See you again. Bye.